In November of 2010, an elderly couple drove to their daughter's house. She hadn't answered her phone all day. She hadn't shown up to an appointment that mattered to her. That wasn't like Diane at all. When her parents walked into the house, they found blood. A lot of it. A trail leading from the living room, through the hallway, and down the stairs into the basement. And it was there, in the basement of her own home, that they found their daughter's body. But what came next, what investigators would uncover in the days that followed, is the kind of detail that chills even seasoned detectives. Because someone kept using Diane Zaleski's house after she was gone. Someone kept using her computer, eating food from her fridge, trying to make purchases on her credit card, as if nothing had happened. This is the story of the murder of Diane Zaleski, a crime that went unsolved for more than a year, until a woman on the other side of the country, talking to a stranger online, recognized something she was never supposed to recognize: who Diane was. Before we get into the details of the crime, I want you to know who Diane Zaleski actually was. Because it's easy, in stories like this one, to reduce the victim to just a name, a case number. Diane wasn't that. Diane was a real person, with an entire life built over 54 years. She was born in Elizabeth, New Jersey. She grew up in Irvington, where she graduated from high school. Afterward, like so many people do, she moved around the area a bit. She lived in Cranford for a while, and for more than 20 years she'd settled into Union Township, a quiet, residential town, the kind of place where neighbors know each other by name. Diane spent 17 years working as a legal secretary at Sharon Plow Corporation, a major pharmaceutical company in the region. She'd retired just a year before everything happened. 17 years is enough time to build a routine, friendships at work, and identity. And she had made good use of that time. People who knew Diane described her in a specific way. Someone who loved life, who loved dancing, who had a wide circle of friends, and stayed close with every one of them. She had sisters, a brother, nieces and nephews who affectionately called her their aunt. She was a woman who, according to those who knew her, radiated a warm energy, the kind of person you miss at birthdays, at holidays, during Sunday phone calls. Union Township, where she lived, isn't the kind of place that ends up in crime headlines. It's a middle-class town, tree-lined, with quiet streets. The kind of place where violent crime simply isn't expected. But in November of 2010, that changed. On November 18th, 2010, a Thursday, Diane's parents realized something was wrong. She hadn't answered their calls, and she hadn't shown up to a scheduled appointment. Something completely out of character for her. Diane was punctual, present, reliable. So they drove to her house. When they arrived, and when they stepped inside, they found a scene no parent should ever have to see. There was blood, an alarming amount of it, spread across the front room, forming a trail that led toward the back of the house, and down, literally down, the stairs into the basement. It was there, in the basement, that they found Diane. They made the hardest phone call of their lives. A frantic call to 911, the kind of call no one ever expects to have to make. When police arrived and began processing the scene, the scale of the violence became clear. Diane had been struck repeatedly, multiple blunt force and lacerating injuries to the head and neck. Later investigation would reveal a number that's hard to sit with. She'd been struck 44 times. 44. That's not the kind of number you see in a crime of opportunity or a robbery gone wrong. That's the kind of number that speaks to rage, to uncontrolled fury, to something deeply personal. Her body had been dragged from the living room down to the basement, meaning the attack likely began in one part of the house and ended, or was at least completed, in another. Investigators with the Union Township Police quickly realized this wasn't going to be a simple case, and that they were going to need help. This is where the story takes the first of several unexpected turns. During the forensic processing of the scene, investigators found a piece of underwear near Diane's head. As part of standard protocol in cases of this nature, It was sent off for DNA analysis. The results came back, and they didn't make any sense, not at first glance, anyway. The genetic material found on it belonged to Ron, Diane's brother. Take a second to think about what that means for an investigation. The victim is found brutally murdered inside her own home, and the first concrete DNA lead points straight back in her own family. Police brought Ron in for questioning, and, according to the investigators themselves, he was genuinely, visibly shocked when confronted with that result. It wasn't the reaction of someone hiding something. It was the reaction of someone who had absolutely no idea why that result existed. This is a critical moment in any homicide investigation, when the science points in one direction, but the investigator's instincts point in another. And in this case, they had to follow both carefully, without dismissing anything, but also without locking onto a single piece of evidence too soon. The eventual explanation for that DNA, as so often happens in real cases, far from anything you'd see on TV, turned out to be far more mundane than sinister. But for weeks, that one piece of evidence cast a shadow of suspicion over Diane's own family, at a moment when they were already shattered by grief. Meanwhile, the real lead, the one that would actually lead to the killer, was sitting right there, inside Diane's computer. When investigators examined Diane's computer, they found something disturbing. Someone had used it after her death. Not right after, in some kind of panic, but calmly, with a level of comfort that's hard to explain rationally. This person watched pornography on Diane's computer, and then tried to use her credit card to purchase tech items, expensive gadgets, the kind any thief would know they could flip quickly. The purchases never went through. The banks blocked the transactions. But here's the detail that truly unsettled investigators. Whoever made those attempts was having the items shipped to Diane's own address. Sit with that for a second. This person wasn't in any rush to flee, wasn't afraid of returning to the scene of the crime. They were planning, calmly, to come back to that house, pick up the packages that would show up at the door, and walk away like nothing had happened. That's not the behavior of some random intruder who panicked and bolted. That's the behavior of someone who knew that house, who felt safe there, who genuinely believed they could come back without anyone noticing. The behavioral profiles built from this kind of evidence almost always point in the same direction. The killer wasn't a stranger. This was someone with geographic proximity, maybe even personal proximity, to the victim. And that lead, more than any fingerprint or blood sample, is what started closing in on the truth. But closing in didn't mean catching the person responsible. And the months that followed would prove exactly that. The investigation moved forward. Detectives with the Union County Force worked the case intensely. But even with physical evidence, DNA, forensic findings, a clear behavioral pattern from the attacker, the killer's name remained a mystery. A year went by. For Diane's family, that was likely the longest year of their lives, living with the knowledge that whoever took the life of someone they loved was still walking around, free, on those same streets, maybe in the same neighborhood, maybe passing them at the grocery store. On the one-year anniversary of Diane's death, authorities made an unconventional decision. They publicly released additional details about the case, hoping that something, anything, might shake loose a new lead. It was a gamble. Cases that go cold for a year are rarely solved after that point. The statistics weren't in the family's favor. But sometimes, the answer to a crime doesn't come from a forensics lab. It comes from somewhere completely unexpected. It comes from a conversation on Facebook. Hundreds of miles from Union Township, somewhere in the state of Massachusetts, there was a woman with absolutely no connection to this case. She didn't know Diane. She didn't know Union, New Jersey. She had no reason whatsoever to get involved in this story. But she'd been talking online with a man, and over the course of that conversation, this man had shared details with her. Specific details. The kind an ordinary person would have no reason to make up, and even less reason to casually bring up in an online chat. Then, at some point, this woman read an article about the Zaleski case. An article that had been published precisely because of that one-year anniversary release of information. And something clicked. The details in that article, the information this man had shared with her, they were one and the same. She could have ignored it. She could have told herself it was a coincidence or none of her business and just gone on with her life. But she didn't. She called the police. That's the kind of moment that decides the fate of an entire investigation. An ordinary person, with no police training, no obligation at all, deciding that the discomfort of making that call was smaller than the weight of staying silent. The information she provided led investigators straight to a name, Arnell Yearwood. And when that name surfaced, one final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. A piece that had literally been right in front of investigators the entire time. Arnell Yearwood's mother lived directly across the street from Diane Zaleski's house. Take a moment to sit with that. For that entire year of investigation, of familial DNA, of behavioral profiling, of theories about who could have done this, the man responsible had been living, quite literally, across the street. Arnell Yearwood had been inside Diane's house before. At some point, he'd use her computer while he was there, and investigators found forensic evidence directly linking him to the crime. Evidence that, combined with the tip from Massachusetts, was enough to close the case. When confronted, Yearwood confessed. He pleaded guilty to the murder of Diane Zaleski in court. His sentence, 30 years in prison, the maximum sentence allowed for the crime he pled guilty to. But there's a question that remains unanswered, one the prosecutor on the case made a point of stating publicly: the motive, the why behind such extreme, deeply personal violence against a woman who, as far as anyone knows, had no significant conflict with this man at all. 44 blows aren't the result of a robbery that spiraled out of control. They're the result of something deeper, and that something was never fully explained, not by the confession and not by the trial. Today, more than a decade later, the people who knew Diane Zaleski still speak about her with the same warmth they always did. Friends who visit her memory leave messages talking about how much they still miss her on birthdays, on holidays, and the small, everyday moments she's no longer there to share. The case was later documented in true crime programs, and investigators who worked it still cite it as an example of how forensic science and sheer chance, an unexpected phone call from a stranger on the other side of the country, can, together, solve what once seemed unsolvable. But for Diane's family, no sentence, no documentary, no podcast will ever truly bring back what was lost that afternoon in November of 2010. What remains is the memory of a woman who loved to dance, who loved life, and who deserves so much more than the final minutes she lived through inside her own home. This has been the story of Diane Zaleski. Remember, everyone has secrets, but some are deadly.